Today, we're going to peel back the layers on one of the most important foods in human history. And nope, it's not a grain, it's not a meat, it's a humble tuber. And let me tell you, this is the incredible, complex, and absolutely world-altering story of the potato.
Can you even imagine someone saying this today about a French fry or a baked potato? But this was the take from Denis Diderot, one of the leading thinkers of the Enlightenment. He even called it windy. Yeah, he was saying it gave you gas. And he figured, that was probably fine for the strong bodies of peasants and laborers, but it was absolutely not considered an enjoyable food.
And that's the big question here, isn't it? How does a food that's literally described as tasteless and undesirable go from being this weird botanical curiosity to one of the most critical crops on the entire planet? Well, the answer reveals an amazing story of famine, empire, ingenuity, and eventually disaster.
Okay, so to really get the potato's impact, you first have to understand the world it entered. And that world was defined by one constant, brutal reality: hunger.
You have to understand, for most of European history, hunger wasn't a crisis. It was just a normal part of life. Just look at France. For 300 years, they had a nationwide famine more than once a decade. And that's not even counting all the local famines. The brutal, simple truth was that Europe just couldn't consistently feed its own people.
So, the solution to Europe's massive problem? It wasn't found in Europe at all. Nope. It had been cultivated for thousands of years, half a world away, in one of the most challenging places to grow anything on Earth.
The potato's journey to Europe was part of this huge, world-changing event. You see, when Columbus and other explorers crossed the Atlantic, they didn't just connect two continents. It was like they reknitted the seams of the ancient supercontinent Pangaea. It set off what one historian called a biological bedlam, as ecosystems that had been separate for eons just collided. And the potato? It was one of the most important travelers in this whole exchange. Now, this wasn't some plant they just stumbled upon. Wild potatoes are actually full of toxic stuff like solanine. But the ancient Andean peoples were incredible innovators. They saw llamas licking clay before eating poisonous plants, and they thought, maybe there's something to that. So they created a clay and water gravy that neutralized the toxins. They bred thousands of varieties and even invented freeze-drying, creating chuño, a food that could be stored for years and sustain the entire Inca army. This wasn't just a crop, this was a seriously sophisticated food system.
Okay, and this slide right here, this shows you the potato's superpower: pure, raw efficiency. Look at these numbers from 18th century England. To feed your family, you needed almost 2 acres of wheat, but with potatoes, you only needed half an acre. It produced 3 times more calories per acre than the old grains. This wasn't just a new food, it was a total caloric revolution.
So with this incredible power, you'd think Europeans would have jumped all over it, right? But the reality was much, much slower. The potato is seen as something deeply suspicious. I mean, just look at this timeline. The first record of a potato being eaten in Europe is 1573. But it took over 100 years for it to be widely grown. And even then, only in a couple places, like Ireland. It took almost 200 years for it to really catch on across the continent. So, what gives? What was the holdup?
Well, for Europeans, the potato was just weird. It grew from these ugly lumps, not from seeds like a proper plant. People thought its lumpy skin looked like the flesh of lepers, so they literally believed it caused leprosy. Plus, it's part of the nightshade family, which includes some genuinely poisonous plants. And get this, in England, it was seen as this foreign Catholic food, which led to the completely bizarre election slogan, "No potatoes, no popery."
The potato needed a champion. It needed a PR guy. And it found one in a French pharmacist named Antoine-Augustin Parmentier. He was a prisoner of war in Prussia, and his captors forced him to live on potatoes. He was totally shocked to find himself in perfect health.
Parmentier was a marketing genius, an absolute master. He threw these fancy all-potato dinners for big shots like Thomas Jefferson. He convinced the king and queen to wear potato blossoms as a fashion statement. But his best move? He planted a field of potatoes and then hired armed guards to watch it all day. Of course, this made the crop seem incredibly valuable, so Parisians would sneak in at night to steal them. It was a perfect piece of reverse psychology.
And this map right here, this shows you why the potato was basically destined to take over Europe. The very parts of the continent that had struggled with famine for centuries turned out to be the perfect home for this new crop. So, once the potato was finally accepted, its impact was nothing short of explosive. It didn't just end famines, it fundamentally rewired human demography on a global scale.
This quote from historian William McNeill is so powerful because it argues that the potato wasn't just food anymore. By feeding these rapidly growing populations, it became the fuel for the Industrial Revolution and for empire. He argues that without the potato, Germany couldn't have become a military power, and Russia couldn't have grown so large on its border.
And you can see the effect right here in this graph. For centuries, the world's population just kind of bumps along, growing very slowly. But look what happens after 1700, right when the potato starts to take hold. The curve just shoots straight up like a hockey stick. That is not a coincidence.
So just how much of that boom was because of the potato? We'll get this. An economic study by researchers Nathan Nunn and Nancy Kian actually quantified it. Their stunning conclusion: the potato is responsible for about a quarter, 1/4 of all the Old World's population and urban growth between 1700 and 1900.
But there was a catch, a huge hidden danger in all this success. Because potatoes are grown from chunks of a tuber, not seeds, every new plant is a clone of the parent. So as people like Parmentier pushed for mass cultivation, they were unintentionally creating vast fields of genetically identical crops. A new, very fragile system, industrial monoculture.
And this is where this incredible success story takes a very dark turn. The very thing that made the potato so efficient, its uniformity, also set the stage for one of the worst famines in all of human history. And nowhere was this dependency more extreme than in Ireland. An acre of potatoes and one cow could feed a big family. By the 1840s, it's estimated that 40% of the Irish people ate no solid food at all except for potatoes. The entire country's food supply was resting on a single, genetically uniform crop. It was a ticking time bomb.
And then disaster struck. A water mold called Phytophthora infestans. Its name literally means the vexing plant destroyer. It's thought to have arrived in Europe on ships carrying bird guano from Peru, which was being used as fertilizer. And it spread with terrifying speed. In the summer of 1845, it went from Flanders to Paris, then across northern Europe, reaching Ireland by September.
Because the Irish potato crop was a total monoculture, the blight found an ocean of identical, defenseless hosts. The result was the Great Famine. Over 1 million people died. 2 million more fled the country. The devastation was so total that today Ireland is one of the only countries in the world with fewer people than it had back in the 1840s. A direct, tragic consequence of relying on a single food source.
But the potatoes problems didn't end with the blight. Soon after, another pest showed up, the Colorado potato beetle. Farmers were desperate. Until one day, someone just threw a bucket of green paint on their infested plants. Turns out, the paint had an arsenic compound called Paris green, and it killed the beetles. This completely accidental discovery launched an entirely new industry, chemical pesticides.
But this fix created a new long-term problem. Pests, like that potato beetle, quickly evolved resistance. First to Paris green, then to DDT, then to the next chemical, and the next. This cycle, where farmers are forced to use stronger and stronger chemicals just to keep up, is known as the toxic treadmill. It's a race that started with the potato, and it's a race we're still running today.
So when you step back and look at the whole picture, the story of the potato is anything but simple. It's a story of incredible progress and devastating consequences, all woven together.
This really is the potato's dual legacy. It was a savior that ended the routine famines that had haunted Europe for centuries. But at the same time, it was a curse that created fragile monocultures just waiting to collapse. It fueled the population growth that lifted billions out of poverty, but it also led directly to the Great Famine. It solved the problem of hunger, but in doing so, it created a brand new problem, our reliance on chemical pesticides. This quote is from a modern farmer, talking about a recent blight that wiped out tomatoes all along the U.S. East Coast. And he was blaming the outbreak on seedlings sold in big box stores that had been imported from across the globe. It's a direct echo of the potato story. It's a reminder that the Columbian exchange never really ended. We live in a world of constant biological exchange, with all the incredible benefits and all the risks that come with it.
And that leaves us with one last question to chew on. The potato was an innovation with consequences that nobody could have possibly foreseen. It reminds us that sometimes our greatest solutions carry the seeds of our next great problems. So what's the next potato on our horizon? What innovation today promises to save us, but might also carry a hidden cost we just can't see yet?